This was the USS Macon, a giant Navy warship and the world's first flying aircraft carrier, armed with its own fighter aircraft for defense.
This kind of fighter, meant to be air-launched from a larger aircraft or mothership, is called a parasite fighter. In addition to their use aboard rigid airships, during the 20th century, various countries would experiment with heavy bombers that would carry parasite fighters for their own protection.
You won't believe what was hidden inside this airship. Longer than 3 city blocks, it had everything 100 Navy sailors needed to remain in the sky for up to a week at a time. Sleeping quarters, restrooms, galleys, workshops, even a mess hall. This was the USS Macon, a giant Navy warship and the world's first flying aircraft carrier, armed with its own fighter aircraft for defense. They could be launched mid-air straight from a hangar inside the ship using a trapeze system. When the Macon was in danger, the fighters would deploy to form a ring of defense, and they could scout for hundreds of miles hunting down the enemy. The Macon also had machine gunners stationed all around, ready to fire on anything that came too close. You might think an airship would be easy to shoot down, but the Macon wasn't some flimsy blimp. It was built with a solid frame and helium cells that didn't explode or deflate under pressure. Even if it took damage, it could still keep flying. Back in the 1930s, the US built 2 massive flying carriers, and they had plans for a whole fleet of them.
Here we go, down the rabbit hole.
He's already coming into power.
It's only a dream.
At least 7 Sparrowhawks, of which only one survives and can be seen today at the National Air and Space Museum's Udvar-Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia, and 6 of the Special Fleet Model 1s, in addition to a prototype. In addition to the Sparrowhawks, the Macon was also capable of carrying 2 specially built 2-seater Fleet Model 1s for training, and 2 2-seat Waco UBF XJW-1 biplanes were also built with skyhooks for use aboard the Macon. Ultimately, only a handful of planes were ever built for the ships. At least 7 Sparrowhawks. One difficulty of engineering stood above the rest during the construction of the sister ships. During the design stage, the fins were altered, as the Graf Zeppelin had nearly snagged her fin on power lines during takeoff from a field in California earlier that year. American officers had witnessed that near accident and sought to find a better system. The change, which included moving the control car, would allow direct observation of the fins, although the fins had to be moved and attached to an intermediate ring instead of a main ring. The Akron's maiden flight took place in September of 1931. The Macon didn't fly for another 20 months when it flew over northern Ohio for almost 13 hours on April 21st, 1933. Unfortunately, the Macon never flew with her sister ship. The Akron was lost just weeks before, on April 4th, 1933, with a loss of 73 of her 76 crew. One of the surviving crew was Executive Officer Lieutenant Commander Herbert Wiley, who took command of the Macon in 1934. By then, the Macon was the only rigid airship in naval service. The Shenandoah was lost in 1925, and Los Angeles was decommissioned in 1932. The Macon served an important role, developing strategies and doctrine for using the airship for reconnaissance, especially in keeping the airship out of sight while the Sparrowhawks performed reconnaissance missions. The Macon's crew began removing the Sparrowhawk's landing gear and replacing it with a fuel tank, which gave the little plane 30% more range. On October 12, 1933, the Macon flew from the East Coast across the country to her permanent home base at Naval Air Station Sunnyvale, now Moffett Federal Airfield, near San Francisco. In April of 1934, the Macon flew cross-country to Opa-locka, Florida, Flying over mountains on the route would require the ship to reach or exceed its pressure height, that is, the height at which internal pressure of the gas bags is equivalent to external atmospheric pressure. At that height, the bags automatically vent air from the bags to prevent them from rupturing. For a time over Texas, heat from the sun caused helium to warm enough to force the ship to reach pressure height unintentionally. This forced the Macon to dump 9,000 pounds of ballast and 7,000 pounds of fuel and run its engines at full power to maintain lift and control in a gust storm near Van Horn, Texas, which caused 2 girders to fail. The crew was able to do emergency repairs, and the Macon arrived in Florida safely. The ship was grounded for more permanent repairs, but the full repairs were not completed. Most importantly, it was decided that strengthening the girders near the top talon could wait until the next scheduled overhaul, when the gas bags could be deflated. In July of 1934, with Herbert Wiley in command, the ship tracked the USS Houston, a cruiser then carrying President Franklin Delano Roosevelt back to California from Hawaii. The meeting was a complete surprise for the President and the Navy. Macon delivered newspapers to the President, and the Houston sent the following message. The President compliments you and your planes on your fine performance and excellent navigation. Well done, and thank you for the papers. The President. The following year, on February 12, 1935, repairs from the earlier damage were still not complete. The ship was returning to Sunnyvale after maneuvers, having participated in a fleet exercise off the Santa Barbara Islands when it was caught in a storm near Point Sur. The storm caused structural damage to a reen which held the upper tail fin, which failed completely. The fin broke away. Debris punctured several gas bags, and the crew immediately dumped all the ballast in an attempt to raise the tail and keep the ship in the air. The ship had lost around 20% of its lift, but the loss of an enormous amount of ballast forced the ship up rapidly, to an altitude of almost 5,000 feet, above pressure height, and the gas bags vented more helium. Historian Richard Smith suggests that the loss of the fin was not catastrophic, but that the failure of the Macon was due to the rapid abandonment of ballast in the first few minutes after the tail fin detached. He contends that it wasn't until the ship began venting more precious helium above its pressure height that the ship became doomed. The ship's engines also continued to run, which may have contributed to the ship's rapid climb as well. One witness described it. She plunged downward and then suddenly rose and disappeared into the storm clouds. The crew fought to regain control of the ship, which sunk relatively slowly over the course of almost 30 minutes following the initial accident. Wiley's first report was that the ship had a casualty in stern. He later radioed that we'll abandon ship as soon as we land on the water somewhere 20 miles off Point Sur, probably 10 miles at sea. Many witnesses and newspapers reported rumors of an explosion. However, the damage to the airship was solely caused by the storm. After the ship had hit the water, it began to sink rapidly, within 20 minutes, while the crew fired off a rocket to announce their position. Already ships from the fleet that the Macon had been on maneuvers with were racing towards it. The USS Pennsylvania reported that Macon survivors located, assistance no longer needed. 81 of the 83 crew members were rescued, thanks to the fact that after the loss of the Akron, the ship had been supplied with life preservers. Commander Wiley was the only man to survive the crash of both ships. 2 men died. Radioman First Class Ernest Edwin Daly jumped ship too early, and Mess Attendant First Class Florentino Edquiba drowned attempting to recover personal belongings from the sinking ship. The crash marked the end of the Navy's use of rigid airships. Representative Carl Vinson held back a bill to build 2 more airships, saying that the loss of the Akron and Macon increases doubt of the practicability of airships. Others attempted to defend airships. Famous pilot and Indy 500 driver Eddie Rickenbacker said the crash should not discourage further development of dirigibles, but should lead to more intense research to perfect construction. Hugo Echner, commander of the Graf Zeppelin, also declared that the loss doesn't prove the Zeppelin impracticable. The U.S. would not build any more airships, however, and technological improvements of planes would soon make them obsolete. Though lost only a short distance from shore, the wreckage was only relocated in February of 1991 by the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. The ship had sunk 1,476 feet, too deep for most kinds of diving. In 2006, along with Stanford University and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, a number of remote vehicles took over 10,000 images and high-definition video of the wreck.
This has been a Pinguinati production. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, links are in the description.